Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Tactical Harmony. And today's guest is someone that I had the pleasure and honor of working with in NCIS for years. I actually met him at my very first duty station, which was Marine Corps Air Station Miramar, located in San Diego, California. And from the moment that I met him, his presence and his leadership stood out to me. And I am just so proud to call him a friend and a mentor through all these years. So allow me to introduce the one and only Greg Ford. Greg Ford is a retired federal law enforcement executive and former director of the Department of the Army's Criminal Investigation Division, becoming the first civilian to lead the organization in 2021. Reporting directly to the Undersecretary of the Army, he oversaw a global agency responsible for felony investigations, war crimes, and terrorism cases, cybercrime ops, criminal intelligence, multidimensional forensics, and protective services for the Secretary of Defense and other senior Department of Defense leaders. Promoted to the Senior Executive Service in 2018, Greg served more than 20 years in federal law enforcement, including senior leadership roles with NCIS across the globe. He now serves as executive director with a Fortune 15 company in global security. Sir, welcome to the Tactical Harmony Show.
Rebecca, thank you very much for having me. I appreciate the opportunity to be here and talk with you.
Oh, the honor is all mine. And I'm going to dive right in. My very first question for you, which is probably of no surprise, is you were the very first civilian to lead the United States Army's Criminal Investigation Division. And I would love to hear your experience about what that change management looked like and what that experience was for you.
Absolutely. So, coming up the way we did, obviously both sharing some time at NCIS, that's a very dynamic world as it is, and you get used to change. So, change is not something that made me uncomfortable. That said, when I arrived at the Army, even though it's a military criminal investigative organization, just like NCIS was, the differences couldn't have been more stark. And as I walked in and identified just how different it was, that really brought into focus the scope of the change that was going to have to be made. And, I think a lot of people that pay attention to that world will remember it was driven by a case out of Fort Hood, Texas, the Vanessa Guillen case, and Army CID's response to that. And I will say that the review of that and some of the deficiencies found were a lot broader than CID. They actually spanned other aspects of the Army, but it's that case and the review of that case that drove the need for the change. And then as I came in and reviewed how we were operating, it became clear that the change and what was identified in that review were really symptoms of deeper underlying issues with how the organization was being run that required even broader change. So the benefit there is we had a mandate, right? So change is always easier when you have a mandate for change. So we had a mandate in the form of that report and in the form of the Secretary of the Army, the then Secretary of the Army's decision to transform CID. But even with that mandate, one of the hardest parts of change is that internal culture change that is necessary in order to really bring about different behaviors and different ways of operating and different ways of addressing your mission. And for me, that was the biggest focus from the get-go, is the population within the agency. First of all, I'm an outsider coming in, right? So that's difficult from the start. I have to gain their trust. I have to display that I have competence in what they do, right? And so a lot of that coming in for me was communication, over communication. I would send out personal notes to the entire agency, right? And I would give them the best I can updates on where we were in the transformation, and more so than where we were, why we were there and why we were going in a different direction, why maybe we decided to change course on something, where we were experiencing challenges, just being very transparent with the workforce. I would then go out to the field offices and visit headquarters components, visit field offices, And I would speak, I think, to the agent core there and to the employees in a way that was very different from the previous leadership. Previous leadership of CID were Army MP officers. And I will say, great people, great professionals in what they do. They were not experienced criminal investigators, which led to some of the challenges. The example I used when I talked to Congress and others was, if you put me in charge of an artillery division, I can assure you that's not going to go well because I do not have that background. I know nothing about, you know, dealing with artillery. If you put me in armor, I know nothing about tanks. It puts you in a position of disadvantage. So me coming in as an experienced criminal investigator, I had the ability to demonstrate my competence, win the trust of the organization, demonstrate to them that this was about them, and refocus the organization on the mission, vice some of the extraneous focus areas that had existed in the past. That really helped drive that culture change. However, it was an everyday effort up until the time I left. I don't consider it done, right? I considered when I left a point where the process and the progress we had made was irreversible. So I felt comfortable leaving at that point and turning the reins over to somebody else. But by no means is that culture change complete. I looked at myself as just getting it started. And when I was leaving, and there were several folks that were upset, concerned about my departure, I tried to assure everybody this is a natural part of leadership, natural part of organizational dynamics. And I kind of compared myself to the old game Oregon Trail that many of us played when we were in school. And I said, I was meant to buy the wagon, put the team together, get the oxen, start heading west, and get us to a point where I knew there was no turning back. And then it's time for somebody else to take over. And that's kind of where we ended up. But yeah, I cannot oversell the difficulty of that culture change that still goes on today. Um, and how much we had to put in at every level of leadership, starting with me at the top and being open to that transparency and that communication in order to drive that forward. And again, the big part of that was the why. And, that's something that I think you and I dealt with in our previous, positions too. You're going to do what you need to do to accomplish the mission, but it helps when you know why you're doing it because that may inform how you get there.
100%. Tethering to the mission, the vision will help others see, especially those who might be resistant to change, or like you said, I'm the outsider coming in, right? So stranger danger comes to mind. But if you are
Exactly.
anchoring it to the predication and to the mission and to the vision and why a change is welcome and why it's going to benefit the organization, that really does make a huge difference. And I wanted to double tap on a few things that you did say, that it's every level. So it's not just the director of Army CID, it is everybody in between. Because if one person is singing a different song, then that's people are going to listen to that. So it's every single person's job, and having that extreme ownership and radical accountability with every single leader to be able to preach that same message. This is why we are doing it. This is where we are headed, and we'll learn from history. Let's go. So I absolutely loved that. And one other thing that I think is huge, especially for maybe emerging leaders that are listening to us right now, or someone that might want to step into leadership one day, is transparency. That is huge, right? Because I know as agents, oh, it's cloak and dagger, and there's secrets and classified information. And yes, all of that can be true. And there's a time and place for that. But as a leader, I'm going to talk to my team and tell them what's going on. There's no BS. I am straight no chaser, as I say, and that will build trust. But as Greg so eloquently put, it's not a one and done. It's something that I do continuously, and it's something that well after that we are gone, it should continue, because that transparency is huge to really get the buy-in from special agents, intelligence specialists, and anyone that is working on your team. One last thing I want to share that Greg said is being experts at change. And I have encountered that personally in my transition from federal government to the private sector is we were so good at change. And it's something that was just built into us. Every couple years, we're going to move to a new duty station. I'm going to inherit a new squad. I'm going to inherit a new mission, which requires me to learn a new set of knowledge and skills and abilities. And I'm just used to it. So when I entered the private sector world and change wasn't as prominent, we'll say, and little changes were broadcasted in a very different way than what we were used to, that was a learning experience and a challenge for me when I'm so used to fast paced and change. And I'm just used to it. So I had to learn as a leader that others are not. And that required a different type of communication, like you stated, and leadership style for me to embrace and really bring out to guide my teams through change management on the other side, I'll say. Okay,
Yeah.
next question for you is what, and this may not be a one answer question, but what is one big lesson or a couple of lessons, Greg, that you learned as a leader from leading Army CID?
So several, and I wouldn't say it was exclusive to leading Army CID, but certainly also experienced them while leading Army CID. One, you cannot do it yourself, right? No matter how much you may want to, right? Once you get to a certain level, and the director of an agency certainly being that level, right? You cannot possibly make every decision, drive every course of action. You have to create the environment and the expectation for the type of agency that organization needs to be to meet its mission. And for us in that realm, to provide the necessary support to the Army. So it's a different type of leadership at that level where you have to set those expectations and then rely on others to meet them and to drive in the direction you're taking the organization. Um, Always tough to do, right? Because particularly when you are in charge of the organization or in charge of a particular element of an organization, you own the ultimate responsibility, but you have to trust and empower your people to go in the direction that you set and to operate in the manner that you are holding them responsible for, and you're holding yourself responsible for. So that's a big lesson. Another one is it really goes back to the communication. And Army in general, but Army CID also was a very insular organization. So it was tough to break through that and to demonstrate why change needed to happen. And so I think one big thing is, because you're in the same industry, even because you're close, partners in the same industry, you can't take for granted that there's a universal understanding of how things need to be done and why. So it's got to go back to that willingness to explain, willingness to mentor, willingness to allow people to voice their concerns, opinions, and questions. A lot of what I did was opening myself up to questions from all levels. I would do town halls, virtual town halls, do 5 in a day to cover the entire agency, and I would never cap them because I'd say, I will stay on as long as there are questions, and I will answer those questions to the best of my ability. And it was really all about educating and changing that mindset of why we needed to do what we did. And I will say that's not something I anticipated when I went into the job needing to do, understanding that we were all working in the same, field in the same arena, and ultimately at the DoD level had the same requirements put on us, but found out that we were operating in a very different manner within that DoD structure. So those were two of probably the biggest things, and then not something that I necessarily needed to learn at CID, but definitely was reinforced, and I think just comes natural to those of us who really care about leadership. Part of that trust that you build is based on how you interact with the workforce, and it can't be fake, and it can't be seen as fake. It has to be genuine. And so I would spend a lot of time just talking to the workforce. A lot of what I did was, if I saw somebody did something that was really in furtherance of how I wanted the organization to operate, I would pick up the phone and I would call that agent directly, unannounced, and just talk to the agent, congratulate them, tell them how proud I was of that and how that fits in with where we're going. And then I'd spend the next 15 minutes just opening it up to them and saying, hey, I do this with everybody I talk to. How do you think the transformation is going? What's working? What's not? Give me that direct feedback. And a lot of times that would cause me to go back to my headquarters team, which sometimes frustrated them, and say, hey, this is apparently what's going on out in the field. And, we're not getting that feedback through other means, but I'm getting it through some of these direct conversations. Let's take a hard look at that. So it is about that connection with the people.
Absolutely. And I love how you highlighted that there were multiple vehicles that you took in order to achieve success and keep moving along the progress train, if you will. And I can't imagine as a special agent if my director were to just randomly call me and I've got a couple years in, what kind of moment that would be for me. That's why I have a huge smile on my face, and for those that are listening, I'm sure you can hear that, because that is pretty cool that you did that. I'm not surprised in the least. And that you held the space, and that is huge, because you can be damn good at your job, you can be a shit hot agent and do great things, but when it comes to leadership, that's a different ball game. I
Mm-hmm.
know people that were mediocre agents that made really, really amazing leaders. And then I knew people that were really great agents that did not make good
Yeah.
leaders, right? And so it does require a different skill set. And that is what we talk about here in Tactical Harmony. And holding the space to create an environment that you can request and share feedback, and you will not be retaliated against. I'm going to say that. I want to say it very directly, because a lot of folks, and I experienced this myself during inspections, hey, I want to say something, but I'm afraid that it's going to get back to me. And you really do, and this isn't just a term, want to create that psychologically safe environment that
Mm-hmm.
my opinion matters, my voice matters, and I'm going to share it with you. And then as the leader, it's up to you to decide what you're going to do with that. Number one, to quote Jocko, you got to detach from your ego. You have to
Yep.
exist in humility, whether you agree with it or not. That POV and perspective is important. And if one special agent or one agent or analyst has it, you betcha that another one does. So that perspective is their reality. And that is on us to be able to shift, to mold, to grow, and to change. So I think that is wonderful. Next question, which is very closely related to my previous one. What are signs of a strong and healthy culture?
So you're right, very closely related to the previous question, because one of the primary signs that I look for is, are people willing to speak up? And not just speak up, but speak up and offer alternate points of view to mine or to others in the room. And I will tell you, I inherited a culture, very obviously Army centric, where if I said something, everybody in the room at least tacitly agreed, right? And I had to make it very clear that that is not what I'm looking for, right? I'm looking for disagreement. I'm looking for alternate points of view. And that's what you need in law enforcement, certainly. Right now, obviously, in a strict military setting, particularly depending on what type of event you're talking about, yes, you need that, follow the directions immediately, no questions asked. In law enforcement, where every agent has their own unique authority and ability to execute that authority, you need to have discussion, understanding, and alternate points of view, right? Because it's those individuals that are executing the authorities and the mission. So I took a lot of time to make sure that that existed because, again, to the point of what does a healthy culture look like? You can't have a healthy culture if you don't have that ability to talk freely, and that did take some time to develop. But I did find, going back to those one-on-ones, when I would call the agents directly, it was a different story because now it was just me and them on the phone, and there was nobody else. They're still a little hesitant at times, but I think I was able to overcome that in most instances. The biggest challenge, to be honest, was with my executive team. Until I had a chance to bring in some folks who knew me from the past and knew what we were trying to and needed to build there, I had a team primarily of folks that have always been at Army CID. And not that there's anything wrong with that, some great people and some people that really adapted and made that cultural change happen. But on the front end, very hesitant to tell me things that I didn't want to hear, and to disagree and to offer alternate points of view. So we eventually got there, but that's certainly one. I think another one that kind of demonstrates a healthy culture is when you have people that are really invested in the mission, right? And luckily, from the world we came from, that's not hard to be invested in, right? What we did in those environments, helped a lot of people and made a difference for the country. The particular services we supported at the time, not hard to do. But in an environment where the culture is poor, you start to see that focus on the mission fraying a little bit. So I think when you see that dedication to the mission, that's another sign of a healthy culture. And then I'd say the third prong of that to me is the dedication to each other. When
Mhm.
you see that that team cares about each other, cares about the agency's leadership, cares about new agents, new employees coming on board, I think when you have those three pieces, there may be some things, and there always will be, that can be improved, but you've got a pretty good start going in terms of agency culture.
Conflict is a good thing. Disagreements are a good thing, and I think
Yeah.
in today's society that people freak out when you don't agree with my opinion, whether it's on social media, whether it's about the
Mhm.
weather or politics, dare I say, people can't handle it and they go crazy or cancel culture comes in, right? But
Yeah.
disagreeing is a good thing and conflict is very, very healthy. And I've had more than one candid discussion in my time, and I know you're aware of that, where I didn't agree with my supervisor or my chain of command, and that was okay. I did so
Yeah.
professionally and respectfully, and I offered my viewpoint, and I offered why I thought that way, and I tethered it and mapped it to a solution and problem solving. I did my very best to do that, and sometimes I was able to execute with what I thought was right, and sometimes I wasn't. But I always held the space where I spoke up, and for anyone that is listening or watching us right now, you have a voice. Use your voice, exercise it professionally and respectfully. But when you do, you're going to build confidence and you're going to let your chain of command know what's going on because no one are mind, we're not mind readers. And I always want to make sure people know that. Um, and
Well,
then
and Rebecca,
diversity. Yeah.
if you don't mind, I just want to jump on top of that a little
Yeah.
bit because your point is right on. Not only are we not mind readers, we're also not perfect, right?
Mm-mm.
And we don't have all the answers. That's one of the first things I would say in any position is if you're looking to me to have all the answers, we're in for some problems, right? Because that's not my job is to empower everybody else to come forward with their ideas, particularly as you move up the ranks in management. You get further and further away from the actual work the agency is there to do, and you have to recognize that and then make sure, to your point, you create that environment for people to talk and bring up the ideas. The director of the agency is not going to have the most innovative idea about how to solve a problem that a case agent is having on a daily basis. That problem is going to come from, I mean, that solution is going to come from that case agent level. And we just have to have a management environment that allows it to come up so that we can be aware of it and implement it.
The boots on the ground tactical perspective is critical. And you are absolutely right. As you climb through the ranks, as you go up the chain of command, you're not going to have that most recent perspective where I'm doing a by walk, a by bust, I'm working a case, all of those things. Yeah, I have those skills and abilities, and I certainly have that experience, but I haven't done it in sometimes years. So your voice matters. We want to hear from you. And that really highlights the diversity of thought. That's what I call it, because that's exactly what it is. I want
Mhm.
people to introduce new perspectives or ways of thinking and innovation, especially right now with AI and all of the crazy automations and technology that is out there. We will be left behind in the dust if we are not keeping up or using it in the right way. I will always say that, in the right way and where it makes sense, where it is safe, but we will get left behind. So we do need people of all ages and all of the things to tell us what is going on. And so we can get better, stronger, leaner, and faster. Next question. So, being a special agent, being a leader, it is a stressful job. It is a tall order, it's a big oath. We've got a lot going on. In your experience, sir, what separates leaders who are able to thrive under that kind of pressure and those who crumble?
So I won't overgeneralize it and apply it to everybody else. I can tell you what it was for me. And for me, it was you can't take yourself too seriously, right? We have a very serious mission, and that you always have to remember. And you always have to make sure you're looking out for the equities of the organization, the people in the organization, and the people we're supporting, right? Those victims and people involved in the cases we worked, and you're doing so to support whether it was the Department of Navy or Marine Corps or the Army, but you can't take yourself too seriously and put all that pressure on yourself and think if I don't do this, the world's going to fall apart, right? And the way I tried to demonstrate that was I would always approach things with a little bit of humor, right? Even in difficult situations, because if I'm uneasy as the special agent in charge, or as the first line supervisor, or certainly as the director, everybody else in that room is going to be uneasy and stressed. So I would always try, even when in the back of my mind, I was a little bit stressed and I was a little bit uneasy, I would use humor to kind of bring the temperature down a little bit, because I firmly believe nobody's going to make the best decisions when you are operating at this fever pitch of tension. So for me, it was humor and getting everybody around me to take a breath and settle down and see me as being relaxed, even in stressful situations. Even sometimes when deep down I wasn't that relaxed. But I just think it's important as the leader to set that tone for the team and let everybody know, yeah, we're dealing with some serious topics. Yeah, there's a lot on the line, but at the end of the day, we're people, right? And we've got to act like people. We've got to release some of that tension, and we've got to work together to come to the best solution possible with whatever challenge we're facing.
We're human, and humans
Yeah.
do human things. And I completely align with that. I also use humor and I'm extremely sarcastic, which I'm pretty sure you remember. And I
Yes.
vividly remember you being humorous and having that relaxed demeanor when we worked in a certain task force at headquarters many
Mhm.
moons ago. And so I am now back in that time, and you did exhibit that behavior, and it did offer a calming effect in an incredibly tense environment and a very big mission. I'm remembering that particular one. So it was
I remember
appreciated.
it very well also. Yeah.
Oh, yes. Cue the laughter. Um, I have a memory of when I was a baby agent with NCIS, and he was my supervisor. He was an annuitant. So he had already retired and he was an annuitant. And he always called me Sunshine. And he said, "Come on, let's have a cup of coffee." And I was like, "No, I have this death scene report I got to write, and I got to do this, and I got to do that, and the next thing, and before the next duty call comes in." And he told me, "If you are not laughing, you are not doing it right.
Yep.
So get your butt in the conference room, have a cup of coffee, relax." And I just felt so much better because that's my natural spirit. That is my nature. I'm very laid back. I love to laugh and joke. And I didn't realize all these years later that would be such an incredible leadership and professional and human lesson. But I remember it clear as day. So I love that you offered that. Okay, let's talk, sir, about your transition from the federal government to the private sector. Was it easy? Was it challenging? Were there any surprises? I'd love to hear your experience.
Sure. So definitely challenging, right? Anytime you do something for 25 years, more than 25 years, and you jump out of that into something new, it's certainly a change from your comfort zone. And I do think back to what we talked about earlier, the fact we go through and went through so much change in the organizations we were part of helped prepare me for that. The other thing that I think helped really prepare me for the transition is, in NCIS and Army CID, Air Force OSI, similarly, we spend our career supporting a stakeholder whose mission is much broader than our own. So, the mission of the Army is much broader and much different than the mission of CID. CID is a support function to help the Army do what it does. Same thing for NCIS and the Navy and Marine Corps. In the private sector, that's what we are in global security and on the security front. We are an element of an organization who is not usually generating revenue for that organization. It's a cost, but you are providing a service that enables that organization to execute its broader mission. So I think coming from that military criminal investigative organization world, the agents there, the leaders there, it's more familiar when you transition to the private sector, the role you were in, than it may be for some others who don't have that stakeholder relationship throughout their career. So that I think helped. Definitely some challenges, right? Different language when you transition to the private sector, little bit of a different pace. And I think where the biggest transition comes in for those of us coming from, particularly law enforcement and intel, it's that purpose, right? The purpose you have in those government roles is very altruistic, right? And that's what drives us to get into those positions to begin with. Um, and I think the fear is always when you leave the government, are you going to be able to find a similar purpose? And I would say for me, very lucky in that regard. And I know it's not the same for everybody, but um, I did spend a little bit of time, and I was in no rush to leave the government. In fact, I was probably planning on spending another 12 to 18 months in the position, but the opportunity came up, and I felt that the position gave me that similar sense of purpose. Again, not identical to what you're going to do in the government, but similar sense of purpose because there still were some ties to U.S. national security, and an ability to not only help the firm that I'm with, but also to continue to help the United States as a whole. So that purpose transcended my transition to the private sector, which for me was important. When I was being interviewed for the position, I said there were two things that were really important to me, and one was whatever position I went to in the private sector was being able to leverage the skills and background I had developed over the past 25 years, and two, continuing to contribute to something that was bigger than myself and bigger than just a company. And uh, luckily, I was able to find that. So in that, the transition was very smooth. Um, I will say what I do miss more than I do miss the camaraderie a little bit. Certainly miss those interactions that we would have, amongst squads, amongst field officers, amongst teams. But uh, I think my time had come, right? 25 years is a long time. There's a lot of baggage that comes with that 25 years. There's a lot of impact on you as an individual. There's a lot of impact on the family. Um, and at some point, it's time for all of us to make that switch and to transition. But that doesn't mean we have to stop contributing, stop helping, right? In fact, Rebecca, when I the way we kind of came back in touch was I saw what you were doing with this, this podcast and these discussions. And to me, this is a great way of continuing to contribute and continuing to help. And that's why I'm so honored to be part of this. And, I too, as I've been gone almost 6 months now, um, I'm looking for other ways where I can continue to give back, continue to help those that came after us. And there's a lot of opportunities to do that. So I don't look at it as an end to the government time. I just look at as a way to transition to the private sector and figure out new ways where I can continue to provide service and help those in those law enforcement roles, intel roles that are doing the job now. Because let's be honest, as outsiders, we can be more vocal in ways that we couldn't be when we were inside, and help provide some of that mentorship and help provide some of that advocacy.
Yes, when we were inside, I love that. On the
Yeah,
outside, we were uncle.
that's right.
You're absolutely right. Everything you said is spot on and very similar to my own journey as well, as it were, from government to private. And for me, it was the pace. I'm used to go, 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 go,
Yep.
24/7, 365, weekends, holidays, and for that not to be the case, it felt like going 100 miles per hour down to 25, and I'm literally leaning forward. What's next? What else? And you got to calm down. So the pace to me was jarring, but the
Yes.
translation of our skills and all of the amazing things that we have learned and done as special agents. And even if you aren't a special agent, if you were an intelligence specialist or any member of the United States federal government, please know that you are able to translate those things. And you are very, very capable. And I personally have had so many clients, a lot of former agents actually, that are maybe a little bit confused, hesitant, or not sure what to do. But if I can do it, you can do it. If Greg can do it, you can do it. We are not special. We just had a way and a methodology to translate that and to continue our service. And the last thing that I would say to that is a passion for people and a passion for purpose. That was my why, that was my service, that was my what I was tethered to. So for anyone that might be listening or watching us right now and you were considering making the jump or the leap or just a new career, private to private, federal to federal, whatever it is, know that you have that ability, but know what your values are, know what your why is. And that's not just cheesy talk, that actually matters because then that will allow you to successfully land and posture yourself in a position where you are able to extend whatever mission that you personally align with. And as you so eloquently said, it's a continuation of my federal service. It's not the end. I've never heard it characterized like that. And I think that's, gosh, it's so on point. I love that you shared that. So very, very inspiring. And I would love to know, how do you want people to remember you as a leader in NCIS and CID? If your name came up, what would you hope they would say?
I guess if you boil it down, um, two things. He cared and he made a difference.
Hmm. Well, I can
That would be
say
it.
that you did
Yeah.
care and you did make a difference in my life. So for what it's worth.
No, I appreciate that. And you made a point earlier about not being afraid to make that jump. And I will tell you, for me, it was easier to make the jump from Army CID at the end of my career to the private sector mentally, right? I felt I was ready for that than it was for the decision to leave NCIS after all those years and go to Army CID, even though it was for a director job, and so what I'll say to reinforce that don't be afraid mentality is I talked to a handful of people before I made that decision. But one of them, who's a almost lifelong friend of mine, is John Calipari, who's the current coach of the Arkansas Razorbacks. We've been friends for a long, long time, and he was one of the people I called, and I'll never forget his advice. I was like, "I don't know what to do. You know, it's a great opportunity, but I love NCIS." And his question to me was, "Can you help?" And I said, "Absolutely." He said, "If you can help, you always go." And that was really the last piece of advice I sought out on that before making that final decision. So,
Mm. That's so resonating. If you can help, then go.
yep,
Wow. And it tethers you to something greater than yourself. It really does, 'cause I've been asked so many times I can't even count, "Why did you leave NCIS? You didn't hit your 20. It
yeah,
doesn't make physical sense. What about your 401k?" I mean, I could go on and on and on, but there was this intuition and inner calling to serve in a different way, in a greater way. I didn't know what that looked like. I didn't know anything about a podcast or opening a business, but I knew intuitively, and I trusted my gut that I was meant to do something else in a different way. And sometimes I didn't even know how that was going to manifest. So that is so, so deeply resonating. And yeah, here we are all these years later talking on my
yeah.
podcast, and we're both in the private sector. And yeah, it's a wild ride full of twists and turns and peaks and valleys, but embrace it all because it's all for your greater good. And I truly, in my heart of hearts, believe that. Gosh, I think we're almost to the end. Just have a couple more questions.
Sure.
I would love to hear your answer on this one. You've worn so many hats and you have a lot on your plate. I would love to hear what keeps you going. Do you have a certain habit or practice or thing that you do that keeps you operating at peak performance?
Yeah, I think for me, it was my family, right? Because at the beginning of our career, let's talking candidly, at the beginning of our careers, we're all jumping in and we don't have a lot of other things distracting us, right? So that working around the clock, that midnight surveillance, all of it's great, right? That's what we want to do. When you have a family, you now have to start balancing that, right? And that's a good thing in a way because that balance helps you become a better person, a better leader, a better agent, whatever it is you do in life. Um, but it does and can pull you away from those work obligations. But for me, making sure I had that healthy balance and that I wasn't sacrificing time with my family, experiences with my family. Kids are only young once, right? And that is really what kept me going. Was it hard to do sometimes? Yes, but it made me and forcing myself to do that made me better at my job and made me, I think, a more well-rounded person and certainly shaped my approach to things at the job. I was never one who believed in, sacrificing the family for the job, right? I always believed you can do both. You've just got to put more on yourself in order to do that. But if you do it right, the time with the family rejuvenates you to go back and put more into the job. So for me, that's what it really was. And I've a lot of people don't know. In fact, I had my wife interacted with somebody after I had retired, and it was somebody from the Army side, and they were shocked to hear that number one, I had a family. These were not people that worked directly for me, but they were elsewhere in the Army, and shocked to hear I had a family because the impression was that I was just at the office war all the time, working around the clock, which couldn't have been further from the truth. But it's that family focus and being well rounded that I think really matters, and for me is what helped keep me going and keep me motivated.
Yeah, it's truly the harmony of it all, which is why I named my business Tactical Harmony. Because if you were too extreme in one way, other parts of you, mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually, will suffer. That is the
Yeah.
law. That is how it works. No one can go 24/7, 365. You're going to run straight into a wall. But you gotta work. I love hard work. So for me, that was really important because I would
Yeah.
go too much, and I will very candidly admit I sacrificed my family for years because I didn't do it consciously or maliciously. I just put me in the case, put me on this. Yes, I'll go TDY, temporary duty
Right.
for those of you that don't know the government acronyms. Put me here. Yes, I'll do this. I'm volunteering. And saying yes to opportunities is great. It leads to success. It gets your name out there. It exposes you to opportunities so you are able to grow and evolve. But also, you have to have the harmony, as you just said, with your family or your friends, your loved ones, your pets, your friends, your community. That is so important because this came to my brain, so I'm going to share it. I had a very toxic person who was in my chain of command. And this person, when I had sick leave once, at the eighth hour, so right after my 8 hours of sick leave, this person called me because, hey, guess what? Your sick leave's done. So I'm calling you. And then started
Yeah.
to grill me about a million and one things. That is what not to do as a leader. That is not a leader. That is a manager. That is toxic. And you learn from that, certainly. But you have to have the harmony and you have to be able to lead by example. So when I take leave and I am resting or doing what on vacation or doing whatever I want to do, my team knows that it's okay. You're not going to be punished. That is rewarded. That is why you have it. That is why you earn and accrue it. Use the damn thing because when you're gone, when you're in your 80s, 90s, 100s, you're not going to look back and be like, "Gosh, I'm so glad I saved all those sick hours and the annual leave and I cashed it out and I missed
Yeah.
all those holidays and birthdays." Said no one ever. So
Nobody.
for me, it helps to do the rocking chair test. Maybe for you, it could too.
And I'll share two stories with you. One, my older son, because even when I do believe I did a good job of that, put a lot more of it on myself. So I'd be up at 5:30 in the morning on weekends, going through read books, going through case reviews, stuff like that, so that when my family woke up, I was with them. Right now, you and I both know the duty phone still rings, things still happen, right? So you get drawn away. So even though I put all that effort in and think I did a good job, and my family would agree, right? My older son at my retirement made the comment that when he was younger, he didn't understand why I was always being drawn away for phone calls or having to go respond to things. Now that he's older, he understands. That was hard to hear, right? Because we all know we put our families through that when we have the types of jobs that we had, but still hard to hear. And there was a law enforcement officer from Australia there, and he grabbed me after the ceremony and he said, my son is the age your son was for the time period he was referring to. He goes, I feel like I need to leave right now and go home and spend time with him, right? So the point is, even when we think we're doing a good job of it, that may not be the perception of everybody else, right? So you got to be conscious and be open to that feedback. The second comment was, during my time as director, and the majority of the agency doesn't know this. Certainly my executive team does, and the special agent in charge. But during my time as director, my wife was diagnosed with lymphoma. So we went through a fairly significant battle where she went through months of chemo. And to your point on having the ability and confidence to step away, part of our job as leaders is to make sure we have a team with us that if necessary, you can step away. And there are some things that will make that necessary, even when you're the director of an agency. And that was one of them. The day we found out, for the 2-week period where that immediate course of action was, hey, we got to figure out what it is, how we're going to treat it. I turned everything over to my deputy, individual by the name of Bob Tracy, who I know you know as well. And I had the utmost confidence, and I basically said, Bob, you've got it. And call me if anything's absolutely going to burn down. But other than that, you've got it. And I would check in with him every couple of days. But to me, that was the thing. That was one of the things that would cause me to absolutely, completely step away and focus on something other than the responsibilities I had as the director. And I will say, the then Secretary of the Army and Undersecretary of the Army supported that wholeheartedly, and great people. So
That's incredible. Thank you for sharing that. That's very personal. That's a lot of heart, but it's so important because sometimes we can do so voluntarily and do our very best to strike the balance, the harmony, and other times the universe will do that for us. So better to exercise that muscle and have it built beforehand. So when it comes time that you don't have a choice, that if that foundation is already laid. Last question. If nobody hears any part of this podcast but this one clip, what message or takeaway would you like to leave them with as it pertains to leadership, mindset, or performance?
So if I boil it down to one, it's, I would say, simple phrase. It's about the people, right? Because you hear different versions of this. Mission first, people always. Yeah, some version of all of that is true, right? But the bottom line is the agencies don't exist, businesses don't exist without the purpose, the mission, but you can't accomplish any of that without the people, right? And so you've really got to focus on number one, attracting, recruiting, retaining the right people, developing them, and making sure they have the ability to come along and they become invested in whatever that mission is and whatever the culture is of that organization. So you've got to give them a culture that is worthy of investing in, right? So it really just comes down to the people. If you manage the people well and you lead the people and you understand that your mission execution and mission success, which is what everybody's here for, whether you're in the private sector or the government, is solely reliant on that workforce and those people, then you'll get it right more often than not.
Yes. People are our greatest weapon systems. I could not agree more. And even in the age of AI, guess who has to architect that? Guess who has to audit? People. I love that.
Yes.
Well, sir, this has been a wonderful conversation, and I could ask you 20 more questions and I will spare you. But for those who are listening that would like to reach out to you and see what's going on in your world, where could they find you?
Best way to find me is on LinkedIn. I have a LinkedIn profile, pretty easy to find. Gregory D, as in Daniel Ford. And always happy to entertain folks that are reaching out that either want to reconnect or connect about future opportunities or just talk.
I love that. And I will ensure that that is linked below in the show notes. So you will just be able to click it and go straight to them. Sir, thank you so much for this amazing conversation. You dropped so many gems, and I took copious notes the whole time. I appreciate you. I've always appreciated your leadership and your mentorship, continued mentorship. Thank you so very much for your time today.
Well, Rebecca, thank you. And again, I applaud you for what you're doing and the forum you've created to allow people to talk about leadership. And I will say, I'm going to go back to something Rebecca said at the very beginning. We first met when she was at Marine West Field Office. Just a competency plug for the person who runs this podcast and hosts this. She was, I think, the most junior agent in the office when I made that visit there, and her cases were by far the best cases in the office. And all the I's were dotted, T's were crossed. So much so we made a special note of that. So I do remember you, and I did remember you long after that visit, because of that competency and your dedication. Your dedication to the work. So again, really, really think what you're doing is wonderful, and appreciate it. And thank you again for the opportunity to do this.
Thank you so much.